Welcome to the 6th episode of the Ithacast. I'm Duck Sung Wint.
And I'm Seth Murtaugh. We're here today with Lisa Nicholas, who is the Deputy Director of Planning for the City of Ithaca. And Lisa, when we have guests on the show, we usually start out talking about their background and your professional background. So I thought maybe you could say a little bit about that, how you came to be a planner with the City of Ithaca.
Okay. Well, like many planners, I think I came to the profession through just pursuing various interests and finding that they all ended up with planning. So I got a undergraduate degree in French and art history from the University of Mexico, which I found wasn't terribly useful in having a career. So, and then I went into the Peace Corps, and I saw a lot of things that.
Where'd you go?
I went to Togo, which is in West Africa.
Wow.
I saw a lot of development projects that were really, I think this really affected me and ended up with, pushing me into planning, because I saw a lot of development projects that were unplanned. There was money with them and they built a bunch of infrastructure, but there was no capacity for it. So there were wells that were broken, there were electrical lines that were down, there were irrigation ditches that weren't working, things like that. So I really think that affected me thinking about how do you make something work. And then.
So you were there for 2 years?
Is that typically 2.5 years? Yeah.
2.5 years.
And then, when I came home, I moved to New Mexico because I had a friend who lived there, and I just started looking at the course catalog for the things I was interested in, and they all ended up being in the School of Planning. So I got a master's degree in planning from the University of New Mexico, which was a very interesting place to work because, the West has a very different land use regulations and different interests. Worked for the National Park Service there and did a heavy emphasis on design and landscape architecture and natural resource management in my studies. And then I got my first real professional job out of graduate school with regional government in Georgia. And that was very interesting. And then I moved here to Ithaca and joined the planning department.
So currently in your job with the planning department, what do you do? What does your average day look like?
For me personally.
For you personally, yeah.
I'm deputy director of planning, so that means that I help manage the department. So that includes, hiring and working with the budget and other management types of things. But I also work, I think my main job responsibility really is I'm staff to the Planning and Development Board, which does all the review for all the development projects that happen in the city. So that's a lot of working with the board, working with developers, helping people get through the process, working with people before they start the process. I work with lots of different people, architects, lawyers, a lot of different city staff to coordinate development projects, usually which have a lot of moving pieces. Those are my main responsibilities.
What does the planning department at City Hall do more broadly?
Well, the planning department and, any planning really goes on the assumption that whether we want it or not, sometimes we do, there will be change. And so planning is to anticipate and manage growth and change. And, change can come from all kinds of sources. It can be internal, external, it can be market, it can be environmental, but planning is really about growth and change and how to manage it in the best way possible. So, we're very lucky in Ithaca that we have a lot of change that is positive. It doesn't mean everybody thinks it's positive, but our change is about expansion, not about contraction, which is good. So we manage growth and change. And how do we do that? We have a variety of ways that we do that. One of them is long range planning, which is, like the comprehensive plan and the area plans, the parks master plan. And that really is about looking at what we have, so taking an inventory, looking at what we need or what we think we need and then looking at what the public thinks we need, and then really coming up with goals and strategies to achieve those things. So finding out what we have, what we need, and trying to figure out how we can accommodate those needs in a way that is as acceptable as possible to everybody. So that's long range planning. We do that. And once you have a plan, you need some tools to implement the plan, and we do zoning, a lot of zoning, development of zoning, and also changes to the zoning ordinance. We also do other kinds of things that will help implement the plan, like develop design guidelines, which will tell developers how their buildings should look, give them more guidance on that. And as I said, my job, part of my job is helping to coordinate the development review process that is with the Planning and Development Board. But we also have the Board of Zoning Appeals out of the Planning Department and the ILPC, which is the Historic Preservation Board. And we also work on, so we do those things, and we also work on, a variety of problems. Sometimes, that's partially what planners do. There's a problem, say, it can be a very big problem or a little problem, like it can be chickens. Okay, people want to have chickens in their backyard. That appears to be a little problem, but sometimes the solutions the size of the problem really has no relationship to how long it takes to solve.
Right. This chicken ordinance took a while.
So that's a little problem. So you come to planners, will be like, okay, chicken ordinance. People want to have planners. What people want to have chickens? What are the potential problems with that or issues that might cause, and how do we craft some kind of legislation that would allow that while protecting other people? And then there's big problems like affordable housing. And so planners might look at that. Our department is involved with looking at, okay, so looking at maybe what the causes are, what our inventory of affordable housing is, how it works, what are some ways we can get people to build more affordable housing? What are the barriers to that? And trying to develop. Sometimes it's legislation for, the Common Council to consider, and sometimes there are other tools you can use that don't have to be laws that can help encourage people to solve a problem. So, yeah.
So that's a ton that the department does.
I thought that was an excellent summary.
And it doesn't even talk about the building code enforcement and stuff.
Right.
But let's go
right.
way back
Yes.
and get to the basics in case people don't even know.
Yeah.
What is zoning? What's the difference between Euclidean zoning and form-based zoning, other types of zoning?
Okay. So zoning is a local regulation to regulate where things are and what uses can be where. So zoning is based on this idea that people have property rights. And everybody has property rights for the property that they own. However, your property rights, you don't have unlimited property rights. So the government is allowed to regulate partially what you do on your property because it is in the common interest to do so. Mm-hmm. So zoning is about land use and, where buildings go, what uses go where, and to some degree, like how big buildings can be and how far they have to be set back. So you mentioned, Duxon, Euclidean zoning, which is the original zoning. It was the original zoning that happened, and it was really based on and came out of a desire to separate uses that were harmful to people. So, you think of all these people moved in, so think of New York City, all in the turn of the century, all these people moved in, there was people living everywhere. There were maybe, industrial uses next to residential uses. There were, there wasn't enough green space. All the buildings were crammed close together. And among, I don't know what the building code was like then, but among other things, it wasn't a healthy environment. So zoning started to try to make a healthier environment for people. And that really was the beginning, was about really separating uses. Mm-hmm. Industrial goes over here, residential goes over here, commercial goes over there.
And you can kind of see that in the remnants of that in the city.
Yes.
Because the industrial uses are largely on the waterfront.
That's right. Right.
And the residential obviously is in the neighborhoods. So you can see that there's that separation.
You can see that. And, obviously we have pockets of commercial within residential. And, Euclidean zoning was really about, again, separating the uses, keeping everybody separate so that people were healthier and happier, had access to light and air, and also regulating how big a building could be. It can be, 20 feet tall. It has to be set back 30 feet from the property line. It has to be 10 feet on each side. All those the backyard has to be this feet. So there's a real feeling of it's about that Euclidean zoning is really about separation. And that worked out fine for a while, but then we got to be bigger and more. And, people feel like Euclidean type zoning also the separation of uses isn't quite so positive in an urban environment anymore. So now, there's been many trends in zoning, but one is moving to more of like the one people are most familiar with now is a form-based zoning, which is really encourages mixed use. So mixing uses, but keeping in mind what uses are compatible. You don't have to you can have residential and commercial. You might not want residential and heavy industrial or something, but it's like looking more at like how the space in buildings interact with each other and how they look too. So it's more, mixing up the uses so that people don't have to, so people can do more of their daily life in their neighborhood, for instance, or within walking distance, or combining uses and looking more at the forms of the buildings, including things like front porches or looking at the pitch of the roof. These are all things that form-based zoning really looks at. Now, we in the city have, as we rewrite our zoning code, every time we do a plan, we're really moving to more of a hybrid zoning. We keep, like the College Town area form districts is really a hybrid between Euclidean and form-based. Mm-hmm. It has all the area, you have to be this far back, you have to do this, but then it also has a lot of design issues.
Right,
in
like
it
regulates
too.
the form of porches and the front facades.
Yes, how big, how long can the front facade be? How, before, Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
What do you think really accounts for that shift from, the Euclidean to the form-based approach? Is it the economy? I mean, because you look at, the economy has really changed, right? I mean, you don't have the same scale of industrial activity, for instance, in the city that you once did, right? With these factories closing down. And I think that seems like it could have a lot to do with that, right? One example obviously is the former Emerson site in Chainworks. I know that
needed to be separate from everything.
Right, it needed to be separate, but now it's like people are the developers talking about basically turning that into like a mixed use neighborhood almost.
That's right. I think zoning, like any field, whatever, it responds to the desires of the people at the moment, and so it keeps developing. There are new branches. There'll be something after form-based zoning, or an evolution of it. I think that urban living is now something that people are interested in, and they want to be close to different things. So that means you have to kind of mix things up. And we find that, like, as a planning idea, mixed use is much more efficient. It brings in more taxes. It makes people happy if you want to live that way.
So zoning is relatively new in the grand scheme of society.
Yes.
And so is part of it, though, some recognition that zoning itself was, if not a mistake, but like taken too far? So when things were chaotic and you did whatever you wanted, what we got were these tightly packed houses mixed in with commercial uses. Right. And I think this is all the stuff that Jane Jacobs likes to talk about as positives. And so somehow
we went the other direction.
I don't know how it naturally evolved, maybe because of all the things that she says. Like, it just makes sense. We took something that naturally evolved and then decided, you know what, we don't want that.
We want the opposite.
Yeah. And so, to what extent was it that the current trends are a correction to, the historical mistakes? I
think that's a good point. And Euclideans, and don't forget, like, zoning is not, it's not required to have zoning. Many places don't have zoning. Right. It's a tool that governments can use. So,
a lot of rural areas don't have zoning.
Houston is famous for, I don't know if they...
And then everything just sprawls, right?
Yes.
That happens when you don't have zoning.
There's a tension there, but I think even, those of us who like the way the city of Ithaca evolved, I don't think anyone would say, let's get rid of zoning, because times have changed. And you still want to maintain some character for what we have.
Euclidean zoning definitely has that, gets blamed. A lot of bad things came out of that too, but we still use it. It has to evolve like anything to what.
It does seem like it could potentially be kind of exclusionary and used to keep certain groups out of certain areas. And I think was definitely true with the development of the suburbs and, zoning that was designed to protect, single family homes at the expense of denser housing.
That's right.
And the rest, so.
And related to that, what can you say about the history of so-called, I say this in quotes, urban renewal? That effort in the 60s. Everyone can see around town that we are increasing our density, but that density is actually not that new in terms of we had density historically, a lot of which disappeared during this urban renewal phase. So what can you say about that?
Well, I mean, I think that's true. Like that, the great example of that is, a lot of things were destroyed during urban renewal, and I'm not an expert on that, but a lot of historic buildings were lost. It was this desire to be new and to, get rid of old decrepit buildings. And we lost a lot during that. We lost entire blocks. And, like the project now that is called City Center, if people know it by that, it's the big project that's right across from CSMA and the Marriott Hotel. That was a densely filled block in the 1960s before it was raised and then had a one-story building on it. So really bring that project forward is really kind of
a restoration. Almost.
It kind of is, of the dense.
Although that's not how people think about it.
That isn't how people think about it. The buildings weren't that tall, but
But you're right. I mean, when you look downtown, there's a lot of places where buildings were torn down and parking lots were put in, which just blows my mind. I mean, there was a beautiful old library on Bank Alley, the corner of Seneca and Tioga, the Ezra Cornell Library, because we talked about this when Brian McCracken was on, our historic preservation planner, and it was torn down. And there's a parking lot there now.
Right, I know.
Which is amazing, because today, like, we would never do anything like that. I mean, if anything, what we focus on today is where to put the people, not where to put the cars. Although parking is always a perennial concern.
It is amazing how much you talk about parking in my profession and many professions.
That was kind of a blip. I guess it was the rise of the car and the rise of the suburbs. And it was a response to that, I guess, to make all these accommodations for cars.
That's right. That's exactly right.
Downtowns were dying. And
that's right.
So the city was trying to figure out, exactly, how to compete with the suburbs.
How do you compete with
shopping
the malls? And exactly. So you create a pedestrian mall and you tear down some old decrepit buildings and you put in some parking lots to try to get those cars to come downtown.
That's right. I really see, like, we talk about people living car free or car less or less car, however, but I really see that we've talked about this for a long time, but I really see developers now really taking this. It used to be unthinkable that they wouldn't build parking. They just didn't think they could do it. And now certainly any student housing, there's no parking. They were very happy to have the parking requirements removed from College Town. And, the downtown developers too, we have about 300 units of development of housing going in, units of development. Listen to me, I sound like a planner. We have about 300 new apartments going in, downtown, and I'm not going to say there's no concern about parking, but these developers built this without much parking. And so they're really starting to feel like this trend is showing in the market too.
Which makes sense because, famously you read about younger folks not getting their driver's licenses as quickly, using public transit more, using ride hailing like Uber and Lyft.
Right. That's really revolutionary.
It's amazing, though, that even despite all that, we still spend a lot of time talking about parking and like whether we have enough parking or whether we have too much parking capacity or there's a lot of it's still a big issue. And I think planning for the future, especially with everything that's going on downtown and making sure that we have enough parking capacity to meet
that's
the
right.
demand.
And I think that one of the things that I feel like Ithaca is, that's tension in Ithaca is we're a little city who really has big city ideas. And so, and that's because of the people who live here and their interests, but we are a little city. And so we pull from 5 counties for employment.
Right.
There isn't the public transport. I mean, many people come into the city to work and they have to drive.
Right.
So as much as we want no parking, we have to come, if you were just talking about the people who live in Ithaca, that would be one thing, but we have to serve all these other people who come in for work. And that creates this tension, it's just not feasible for someone from, I don't know.
But as someone who sits on the TCAT board, we are trying to find creative ways to accommodate even them.
Yes.
And so now there's more, we have limited resources. And I know people are perennially frustrated with the amount of service that TCAT provides. But I will say that
it's good, though.
For a county this size, it reaches surprisingly far compared to our other peer transit services.
I agree.
But people are talking about, how can we set up some parking rides so that even
that's right.
commuters from outside the county don't have to actually drive into the city.
Yeah.
And that benefits everybody.
Right.
It benefits the person who would otherwise have to pay for parking, they could park for free at a parking ride. It benefits people who absolutely have to enter the city in a car because it reduces traffic. And it benefits TCAT itself, who is dealing with congestion on a much larger scale.
That's right. Yeah.
We had a pretty interesting discussion about this last night at council. We're talking about like the willingness of the city to subsidize the parking, like with property taxes, right, above and beyond what is paid for through the parking rates. And it was interesting just to listen to the different individuals who had like kind of different opinions on it. Like I don't typically use the garages in the city,
no,
because like I live downtown and I walk to work, and I mean it has crossed my mind that I'm paying like a huge amount of property taxes on my house to sustain this structure that's mainly being used by people who are driving in from outside. So the question is, how comfortable is somebody like me and yourself, all of us actually, city residents who pay taxes, how comfortable are we having those taxes go to support
the parking
garage that supports people who are driving into the city? And it was interesting to hear the debate because, council was kind of split on it. And some people were like, absolutely. I'd be comfortable doing it because there's a value for downtown. It supports the businesses downtown. They definitely need people to shop in those stores and restaurants. And a lot of their customers come from outside the city. But on the other side, I think there is a sense it's like, wait, why should I be penalized if I'm riding my bike through the rain to get to work? Like, why should I be paying to support people who are driving in from?
Yeah. And that is very true. And I can imagine feeling like that. But, we have to think about also like Tompkins Financial, they just built their headquarters downtown.
Right.
They could have built it up in Lansing where there was plenty of parking.
That's what everybody says.
Herald Square has a huge amount of office space that they need to rent.
Right. Yeah.
It would be great if all the people that worked there lived downtown. So it is being shared by those businesses that choose to the tax
That's
burden
a good point.
that are locating downtown rather than someplace else where there's plenty of parking, and they do have some needs.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
And the hotels subsidize it.
And the hotels subsidize it. I mean, again, this is tension. I think of like we're really a small city. And so we don't have unlimited options for what we can provide.
We have less scale.
Right.
I'm sometimes tempted to make parking completely private, that if there's a demand for parking, the private sector will meet that demand with private parking.
Yeah.
But because the scale is so difficult, it's kind of unlikely to see what you see in larger cities. And so even I, who is not a fan of parking of any kind, of government subsidizing parking, have to acknowledge that there is a public good in some parking.
Yeah. So kind of along those lines, what do you think are the biggest challenges facing the city at the moment from like a planning perspective? Obviously we've just been talking about one of them, parking. What are some others, do you think? Well,
the affordability of the city and affordable housing. That's really, it's not just us. The market.
It's a nationwide problem.
It's a nationwide problem, and the market is nationwide, and I understand even internationally has boomed for student housing. And we're a small city with a gigantic educational section. So we have tons of students, and they will pay a lot for housing. And so that has really driven land prices up and made it really challenging to be able to make the numbers work for affordable housing. And we're lucky to have some local agencies like INHS who can put together, funding packages to make it work, but we need more. That's a huge problem.
I was thinking about that with, you just mentioned Tompkins Trust, which I agree, like, them locating downtown is huge for the city. And I was talking to some of their employees, probably around my age, probably in their 30s, and it was like, so you ever thought about living downtown? And they're just like, no, it's just too expensive. That's part of the problem is that, they're driving into the city, but if they could afford to live in the city, well, then maybe they wouldn't have to drive.
Yeah.
We wouldn't solve that car problem. Right. So, that they're tied together. The transportation and the housing issues are
tied together. That's right. And, there is certainly the argument, and we probably, as all being downtown residents, understand the economy of paying a little more for your housing and less for transportation. But not everybody sees that calculus or even can can live by that. But so I think affordability is a challenge that we're really trying to figure this out. And we just passed the tax abatement program that will include affordable housing and requirement to build affordable housing. We'll see how that goes. We'll see how that goes. We don't know, if that's going to be doable for developers, but we'll see.
Right.
And I think, so there's that. And then there's, one of the things we talked about in the comprehensive plan was even though Tompkins County has been growing the population, the city really, its growth is very slow. So, and part of it is because we don't have enough housing. So we're building more housing and that should solve that. But we really would like to attract more people to live in the city. Because we serve all these people from outside the city anyways. So we think it would be, definitely make the city more vibrant. Patronize all the businesses, work and live in the same place. So, that's a challenge to grow the population of the city too, for the people who want to live here.
It does seem that there's and this has been the case for the whole time I've been on council. There is a lot of anxiety about that growth.
Yes,
and making sure that it's done appropriately and the scale at which you're growing. And I remember Eric Rosario, who preceded me on Common Council, had this expression. He called it density and its discontents. As you densify, this is just good for the tax base. And it is what you said before is totally true. We're lucky to be growing and not contracting. Yeah. But there are other issues that arise with that.
That's right.
There's always going to be an impact, and the impact comes in the form of quality of life issues and traffic and noise and what have you. And I think that's what makes developing in Ithaca challenging sometimes. And I'm sure, I know I'm preaching to the choir with you.
You're not preaching.
You know about this way more than I do. But, it's people, when there are development projects, people get upset.
It's hard.
It can be challenging.
It is hard. Yeah.
What are some ways that we can mitigate those impacts? Are there ways that we can kind of I guess planning is one way, and coming up with a plan, a comprehensive plan.
Plan. We have planning sort of with public input. That doesn't mean everybody is happy, but to the extent possible, you heard what people said, and we directed the growth to one particular area. Now, we're not in control of how many people are interested in developing at any particular time. Right. That surprises me every day, how many people are interested in coming here and doing projects. So we're not really in control of that. So I think that just keeping people, what I hear over and over again is keeping people informed. Right. Of what is going on and why and how long it's going to last and what the impact is to them and how they could potentially have options for dealing with that impact.
I believe very strongly, anyone who knows me knows that I feel this way, but I believe very strongly that municipalities, in the absence of billions of dollars, which we don't have, our most powerful tool for creating affordable housing or affordability is zoning. So it doesn't cost anything to change zoning. What it does is encourage the development of more housing. And we could do it tastefully. Like you just said, we concentrate the densest development in certain parts of the city. I personally feel like we can do more even in the more residential areas to encourage row home or townhouse development, which adds density without significantly impacting character, in my humble opinion. Because we don't have hundreds of millions of dollars of federal aid to build social housing. So for me, it's always been two-pronged. I feel like we have a lack of the other prong, the government-provided housing. And so we're doing the best we can, I think, with the market rate housing. I know it's insufficient, but we're seeing in Seattle where there's a glut and it's bringing rentals down. And so I'm encouraged by some of that evidence.
Yes, it's always, that's one of the things that is often said. Well, if there's more housing, that'll bring the rents down. And we haven't really experienced that.
We're not there yet.
We don't have empirical evidence of that yet, but we hope, that that's the way it will go, that as more students.
I do think that Steph and I have both heard from various landlords concerned that their rents are softening.
I've heard that too.
I've heard that too.
Yeah. And that's what sort of should happen. But people, of course, if it's your rent that is going down, it's not going to make you happy.
I think part of the concern right now is that we're adding, it seems like we're adding a lot of housing, I'd say, is more at the higher end of the income. Well, Duck always makes this point that we don't actually have luxury housing in the city. Luxury housing understood as like some, you have like a doorman and like, like that kind of thing. Like they have in New York
Marble
City.
countertops. Yeah.
But like the housing that we're adding, I feel is for people
higher
that are,
end,
it's higher end. It's like, you're $1,600 to $1,800 for a 1-bedroom, which there's only so many people in this community that can afford to pay.
That's
that.
right. Yeah.
There's a lot of students, I think, who can afford to pay that because they come from wealthy backgrounds. But especially as you develop downtown and farther away from the institutions of higher education, there's not a lot of people that are going to be able to afford those rents. And I think what we're missing is
the middle.
That's
That's what we say. Yeah, the middle. So it's finding the missing middle. It's finding so that's for, the average person, working person. And that really it's finding the combination of the right site, the right land price, and then trying to build a building that you can afford to build for that within those parameters. We don't have a lot of property in Ithaca. We're built out. So if you're looking at, finding a property that can be redeveloped or, because there's not a lot of land, it can be expensive. So it is the missing middle is, we talk about that a lot. That is, and we don't know what will happen with, Cornell has this North Campus residential initiative, which you've heard about, and they're going to be they're going to be housing all of their freshmen and sophomores on campus. And that might create some kind of opening for,
That's right. I mean, so that has what might be positive and negative effects. One is like it takes pressure off the housing market. On the flip side, we get no tax revenue.
That's true.
For those residents.
That's right. Yeah.
And for the missing middle, that's again why I plug row homes and townhouses.
That's right.
Where it's a way we hear all the time about how there's not enough owner-occupied housing options.
Right.
And people want to buy and have equity and see appreciation. And so there's only so many single-family homes, and we're sitting in one right now that I had to outbid multiple bidders on. So I contributed to this problem too. But if this block had, row homes all along it, there'd be a lot more units that would cost less and be potentially more affordable to the middle income person.
Yeah. Yeah, there is a real lack of like new for sale housing in the city. That's something you hear all the time.
That is something you hear all the time. Yeah.
For first time home buyers. And we don't, aside from INHS and Habitat for Humanity and a few condo developers, we don't really have anyone who's building for sale.
It's more than you probably think here and there, over the past 8 or 9 years, there's probably been 50 homes built, it's here and there, there's little lots here and there.
Do you think it's increasing?
INHS. No, because it's just but we're getting to the end of that. There's a lot of property like on West Hill. There's been several homes built up there, several in Bell Sherman, even a couple down in Fall Creek. There's a couple double lots, but yeah, it's not, we are never going to expand the housing the way people want. And what we need by just owner-occupied by building new single-family homes.
It needs to be like townhomes.
Townhomes. But, I think when it is apparent to developers that is something that they can sell, they will build it. They must not believe that. Even INHS with their beautiful townhomes, those did not go as fast as they thought they would. They're great and they're affordable and, they have sold, but not. So I wonder if
the rental went faster.
I wonder if there still needs to be, we're still changing and we're growing into that.
Right.
Yeah. And I think, when I was growing up, there was this assumption that homeownership was always better. And I have to say, as someone who owned a home through the 2008 financial crisis, that is not always true. And that I think the stigma with renting is starting to disappear because A, the market is unpredictable, and B, there are tangible benefits to renting, which is
that's right.
Not having maintenance, not dealing with the fickle market. That risk is pushed onto someone else, and that has value.
Yeah,
I think you see that too with people who are retiring and they sell their house and they want to move downtown and they might be more comfortable renting an apartment.
They don't want to deal with it. Yeah,
exactly.
I hope we don't lose people with this, but let's get back to some nuts and bolts about planning. So people make this assumption that Common Council has all this control over development. And actually, we're not, except for one special case that we'll get to later.
Yep.
We're not involved in approving developments. There are a couple boards that you might have to go through. Certainly go through the Planning and Development Board, which is distinct from the Planning and Economic Development Committee that Seth chairs. So you go through the Planning and Development Board, and then if you need to go outside of the rules of zoning, you go to the Board of Zoning Appeals. So can you talk a little bit about the process that a developer goes through to get a project approved?
Sure. And I want to just say that before a developer can get a project approved or before anybody can develop anything, it's the comprehensive plan, which has a lot of public input, and the zoning, which also has public input, that decides how big things can be and where they go. And that all has public input. Once that's been decided, that can always change too, but once there's zoning in place, which is a big public process, people have rights to develop in certain ways. But we don't let them maybe exercise all of their rights. They have to go through a development review process. So maybe the zoning says you can have 10 stories and 110 feet, and it can be, but you have to go through the planning board, which will look at, okay, what do you want to build? What are the environmental impacts of that? And environmental includes traffic and drainage and, what's the stress on the system, and also includes things like, the aesthetic. How will it look? How will it fit into the neighborhood? Is it compatible? The Planning and Development Board takes a development project through the site plan review process, which looks at all of these factors and, kind of adds an extra layer of review on what a development looks like, how it will fit into the community, who it will serve. If a property is zoned in a particular way, the Planning and Development Board can't say, no, you can't do anything on that property. And they also can't say, you have to do for sale housing. It can't be a rental, or you can't rent to students, or you can't, it's all a negotiation to get. So what they're trying to do is to get the best project they can within what is legally allowable.
Right.
Common Council at that point doesn't have any involvement because those decisions have already been made.
Right. We set up the parameters. We set up the rules that the planning board lives by. And that includes the semi-newly passed design guidelines.
That's right. So the design guidelines, which we have now for downtown and College Town, also give guidance to developers and give the city more control over what buildings look like and how they function. But, there's many things that are really negotiations between the developer and the planning board. And the planning board can ask for a lot and the developer can offer, it's a negotiation. So we never know exactly where you're going to land. But really their goal is to get the best project possible for what is legally allowable. And, I've seen projects. I've been doing this for 13 years now on the planning board, and I've seen projects come in one way and change a lot. And for the better. I feel always for the better.
And
is that helpful?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And just so that people know, even the city itself has to go through its own process.
That's right.
So we just approved some money for the Brindley Street Bridge project.
Which had to go through site planning.
That had to go through site plan review. And part of the reason why they were asking for more money, DPW was asking for more money, is because the Planning and Development Board requested enhancements to the project to make it more attractive.
Because
that's the city putting that burden on itself.
Yes, that's right.
So no one's exempt.
No one's exempt. Right,
exempt.
Exactly. And so sometimes, though, you mentioned the Board of Zoning Appeals. Sometimes a developer or a project wants to develop a project, but they can't, for some reason, they don't want to, or they have some obstacle. They can't comply 100% with zoning. So a really simple example is a lot of the houses maybe in your neighborhood don't comply with zoning because they were built a long time ago before the zoning existed. So then you want to put an addition on it and expand your house or whatever. Well, you're not going to you have to go to the Board of Zoning Appeals to get a relief from the existing front yard, side yard deficiency, whatever you have. So that's a simple example. But sometimes a project will want a little more height, or they can't comply with the height because they have to get out of the flood zone. So they need to be a foot taller, or they want to do something that improves the project, but it doesn't 100% comply with zoning. So they go to the Board of Zoning Appeals and ask for what's called relief from the zoning ordinance. And the Board of Zoning Appeals looks at that as their basic job is they look at how big is the relief that the applicant is looking for, and how big is the impact on the neighbors to what they're asking for. So they have to weigh that. Yeah.
And then in certain circumstances, they have to go through another board called the Ithaca Landmarks Preservation
Right.
Commission.
If they're in a historic district.
If they're in a historic district, all buildings in a historic district have to be deemed compatible with that district. And they have to go through the ILPC, who looks at, down to a very detailed level of, materials, massing, to make sure that the buildings don't have to look historic. They don't have to be replicas of historic buildings. In fact, we don't really want that, but they have to be of similar quality and compatible in massing and scale to historic buildings, right? So there's a lot. We put people, I often hear or written that, wow, that project happened so fast. It got pushed through the process and it got approved, and that isn't even possible to happen. We really ask a lot of people, and we are legally allowed to do so, but we do ask a lot of people, and of people who want to do projects, and they have to go through a pretty rigorous process, very rigorous process.
How does it work with, again, this is something that council doesn't really have any purview over, but the granting of a variance. So a project comes in and it's reviewed by the planning board, and the planning board determines whether a variance would be appropriate. Do they make a recommendation?
So the planning board is advisory to the Board of Zoning Appeals. So they look at a variance and make a recommendation to the BZA on the basis of how does this fit into a long-term plan? Does it have any impact on planning and how we, our vision for this neighborhood, or our vision for, so they look at it from a planning perspective, not so much from how does this impact the neighbor right across the street, or
does it fit into the city's long-term goals with the comprehensive plan? And,
yeah.
Right, yeah.
So having said all that, I just said, usually Common Council has no say other than setting up the rules, again, via zoning or design guidelines or other laws. We don't really have much input, except there is one mechanism, and it's called a planned unit development. Tell us about how that works.
So a planned unit development, PUD, as we call it, is a tool that allows a person who wants to do a project, a developer, to not comply with the underlying zoning of their project site. So they have a project site and has a particular kind of zoning, and they want to do something that doesn't comply with the zoning strictly. Like, it can be use or it can be size. Usually it's size and density. And they can do something called a plan unit development. And that is where they get to basically write their own zoning for the site, but it has to have a pretty compelling public benefit. So in this case, when somebody wants to do this, and we have we've had a couple PUD projects, and we have one now with the Chainworks project, which is the old Morse Chain facility. When you do this, the Common Council is very directly involved with that, because they really make the determination of, is this good enough? Is there basically the determination they're making is there enough public benefit to allow them to go beyond, to do something other than what the underlying zoning is? That's really the decision Common Council has to make. And then after that, once they make that decision in concept, then a developer will do the zoning, and then Common Council will have to actually adopt the zoning if they agree with it. Like any other zoning ordinance, it becomes part of the code. And so the zoning on that property, the PUD on that property that was developed, becomes part of our zoning code. And those are the regulations that the developer has to work within when they do their project. So some kinds of public benefits that could happen would be, like, say they want more height, but they're willing to do affordable housing. Say they are bringing they want to add a lot of commercial and they already have a tenant that would really help. Say they are going to bring something into a neighborhood that we really want. They're going to bring, maybe they'll build extra parking, or they'll build a park or something. It really is about the benefit. Like, why, it has to be enough of a benefit to make the Common Council even consider whether or not to allow a developer to write their own zoning. Yeah.
People might mistakenly think it's like a giveaway, but
it's
a gigantic risk going through the 10 of us, and
exactly
who can, they can spend hundreds of thousands of dollars coming up with a plan that we decide just to shoot down in one night.
Right. So they have to up front, they have to develop the zoning, which, in order to understand what the zoning is, they have to develop basically a site plan showing council what it's going to look like. What does it mean to have these zoning regulations? What does it mean to have 40 feet or 100 feet? How's it going to look? And usually a PUD will also have a lot of design guidelines with it, how the building's going to look. So, right. It's a very risky thing for a developer to do. And it's a very rigorous process. Yeah.
And I think too, at least from my perspective, it's impossible for us to anticipate every possible use of land. And so what it allows is creativity. And if
That's
so,
right.
like decades from now, someone has like something truly unique that we never anticipated, it would be unfortunate to be constrained to really old rules when there's someone who is a visionary and comes up with something.
That's right.
Really,
That's right. It really allows for creativity. Yeah.
And there's a lot of anxiety about this.
There is, yeah.
Just because I think in general, it's like what I was saying before, the density and its discontents, the just concern over growth. And I think a lot of people have this feeling that like Duck said, it's kind of like an end run around the zoning. But what I try to tell people is that it's actually an additional level of review.
It's additional level of
review. It still has to go to the planning board.
Right.
I mean, what we're talking about is actually getting a vote of common council. And in that case, you have the opportunity to contact your elected officials and lobby them to
That's
whether
right.
to support the project or not
Right.
support the project. In my short time of reviewing these, I think it's been pretty successful because it does allow, the one I think about is McGuire, which ultimately was rejected by council, but there was a real opportunity, I think, for the community to weigh in and,
That's right.
let its concerns be heard.
They did.
And they did. And I think that, I think there's a value to that. And so,
They don't normally have that
they
level
don't,
right,
don't usually
right.
have that opportunity and council doesn't. So
And
council doesn't really have
That's
the opportunity
right.
to weigh in at that level.
It's not an end run around the zoning because it's developing a new zoning ordinance, which has all the requirements of public participation as any zoning, and there's no obligation by council to accept it.
Right.
If you don't get what you want or what.
Yeah.
I mean, the common council is in a difficult position because you still have to weigh what people want with what the city needs, and it's and what the benefit is, what we get, what we give. But it is in no way an end run. It's a rigorous process.
So what's this PUD overlay district that Steph and I just approved recently?
So the idea of having planned unit development has been around for a really long time, but people are nervous about it because they're nervous about what might happen if you just take away the zoning. And so it was originally, when the city passed it, it was restricted only to industrially zoned properties. And at that point, there were it was very limited what was industrially zoned. It was Emerson, Cherry Street, and Carpenter Business Park was industrially zoned. At that point, the PUD was first adopted, when was it? 2012, maybe? 2012. Yeah, I think it was 2012. Yeah. 2012. So,
just for the industrial zone.
Just for the industrial zones, as a way to sort of test this out. Does this seem like something that people want to do? It was an easy way to test out. You limit PUD to a particular, areas. So since then, actually, the waterfront has been rezoned, and we only have one industrially zoned property anymore, which is Emerson, which is in the process of a PUD. So we don't even have any place you can do a PUD anymore. So there was an interest in expanding that to other parts of the city to see what would happen. And if people would be interested, especially I think maybe in the waterfront and College Town, where land, is being assembled, if people would have interest in doing this kind of thing. So you just passed that. So it opened it up to other areas. It wasn't all areas because you went through a whole public process to see what people felt comfortable with. And I'm sure made lots of compromises about where it was to be.
It kind of seems that there's an incremental introduction of this
That's right.
concept to the community.
Yeah.
It's like we've limited it to industrial areas and now we're kind of trying it out in the urbanized areas.
In other areas.
Well, it was like, if I remember correctly, it was industrial, and then staff had a proposal for allowing the whole city to potentially go under PUD.
That wasn't,
and then the Planning and Economic Development Committee that Steph chairs then ratcheted it back
Well, and actually, originally there was a proposal for the whole city, and it got ratcheted back to the industrial zones.
Yeah,
so I
that's
think there's
right.
always
So it's like it's
always
very incremental, and we'll see. If it works well and people get used to this idea and they see some really big benefit from it, maybe it would be applied to the whole city. I mean, Again, there has to be a big benefit. It's
Definitely.
not like
and I understand people's concern. I mean, I actually was just arguing with somebody about it earlier this afternoon. A second word constituent who will remain nameless, who was like, this PUD thing, and he was like, the city's never seen a development it doesn't like, and this. And again, I was just saying, like, it's not. It's an additional level of review. It was like, you have the opportunity to come to Common Council and call me.
That's right.
You're sitting here right now telling me that you hate this thing. That that's going to influence. That could influence the way that I see it.
You have a lot. There's a lot of ability to shape it.
There's a lot of ability to shape it.
That's right. I mean, a person doing a PUD or developer comes in with a proposal, and then you start working on it till you get what is acceptable. So.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk about the ultimate PUD now that we're on PUDs.
All right, you want to talk about Chainworks? Yeah.
Enormous project.
It's an enormous project.
It's has the potential to truly transform something that's been unused for decades.
Yes. What do you want to know?
How many acres?
How many acres? It's like 90. The whole property is 93 acres. Much of it is in the town. It's in the city and the town. So the town is going through a parallel process with, they call PUDs PDZs in the town, planned development zones. So we're going through this process simultaneously, and the planning board is doing the environmental impact statement for the whole thing. So, it's an industrial facility, that has, that the developer is interested in cleaning up and transforming into mixed use, keeping some industrial, having some commercial, and having in total over the whole city and town about 900 apartments or dwelling units. It's such an interesting project because I think I can see it from my office, and we would sit around and always look up at that and think, wouldn't it be amazing if that could get developed? Never thinking that someone would actually do it because it's very complicated, because it's very contaminated. So that's, I feel that we're very lucky to have somebody, it's already there, right? It's already built, which makes it, to begin with, a great project because we don't have to build something new. There's almost 1 million square feet up there. It's just the complication of, it does have a lot of contamination, but the developer has been willing to go through the process of applying to the DEC for the permits they need to clean it up and bring it up to a residential standard so that they can develop it for mixed use. So it really has a potential of reshaping, I think, student housing on South Hill, potentially. The developer isn't saying exactly what the mix and who they're going to target, but it definitely has that potential.
Right. Which would be good for those neighborhoods on South Hill, because get the students out of those owner-occupied neighborhoods.
That's right. I think it has that potential. It's very close to downtown. It is up a vicious hill, but it's like if you walked from the library, you could get there in 3 or 4 minutes. It's very close to downtown.
I think people don't realize that because you can see it from the flats, and so you figure it's really far away. But actually, it's quite accessible.
It's quite accessible.
It's a great way to add housing that's accessible to
very
downtown.
Accessible. And their idea really is to make it almost like a neighborhood in itself, to transform it to not like a regional destination, but like a destination that people, have. Those buildings are so big. And they're so, you could do so many things that just you wouldn't normally have the opportunity to do there, in addition to housing. So they're really looking at making it kind of a destination. Right now, we're still in the process, the environmental review process. We're getting sort of towards the end of that, and we're working through the PUD with Common Council, and we still have several months to go. So to really see what will be the right. Really, it's an issue of, I think right now we're at, building heights. What are the right building heights along Aurora Street? That seems to be a really big issue. So we need to, they need to help us understand what they're proposing and how it might impact the neighborhood.
Right. And there's always, again, even on council, there's a tension where I I am more accepting of greater heights than my colleagues like George and Cynthia might be. I don't mean to call them out, but this is very public information that they see. You watch any council meeting, and it's pretty clear that, there's different tolerances for that kind of thing. And my motivation, it's not like I love them for themselves, but the impact of having more housing available, as we've discussed earlier tonight, affects the rental market.
Right.
And makes things more affordable in the long
And,
run.
that's such an interesting site because a lot of times with development projects, you really look at the context. What's the context? How does it fit into the context? Well, that site is its own context. It's so big. And yes, it touches the city on the end and there's a neighborhood, but for the rest of it, a lot of it is undeveloped. So it could actually create a whole new context, and that would be valid because it's just what we want.
And I have sense, I think you're right that there's a lot of, you got to sort out the details and the height of the buildings and that, but I have sensed from the neighbors up there, there's a lot of excitement about the project. It's not, you don't really find that people are trying to block this or say like,
Agreed.
There really is, from the neighbors, there's a sense that this is a real opportunity.
It's an opportunity. Yes, it could be.
So I don't think they want to see it abandoned either. I mean,
It's just sitting up there
They would rather
abandoned.
see it cleaned up and reused.
Yeah. Sure. Which is, in my experience, kind of unique in big development projects in the city because there's usually people get pretty upset.
Yeah.
Especially people in close proximity.
Yes,
to big
it's
projects.
true. We haven't seen. People are concerned about the contamination, and that's
There's the
really most
contamination.
of what we've heard from the public during the environmental impact statement when people came to speak. A lot of it was traffic. There's traffic, and
But nobody's trying to like block the project. It seems like there's a collective desire to see something
happen. The project is very exciting in many ways, but one of the really, really great benefits of the project could seem small, but it's something we've been working on for a long time is the bridge to nowhere over, or it's called the bridge. I could become a bridge to somewhere. That was part of the Gateway Trail that was going to connect South Hill to the Black Diamond Trail and Buttermilk Falls and Treeman and Teganic. And so there was one piece through Emerson. Emerson has from South Hill, Emerson has, owns all that property. And so there was one piece in particular that was going to be very difficult to acquire. With this project, we will get the easement for that, and you'll be able to walk from downtown 3 minutes and get on a bike or hike, and you can go to all three of those parks and many other miles of trails without ever seeing anybody else. It's a coup. It's a total
That's terrific.
It would be a great benefit to the people who live there and to the city in general. Absolutely. And then we wouldn't have to hear jokes about the bridge to nowhere anymore.
Right. So that bridge, when did it go in? Does it have to be maintained? Is it still okay?
It's all good questions. All before my time. I can't remember exactly when it went. There was funding, and so we built it, thinking that the rest of it will come. That would be an expensive part, right? To build a bridge over a state. Right. Yeah. So we had the money, it happened, and then the rest of the trail never happened. And so recently they took the decking off of it. But that can be put back. So the bridge is fine.
The bridge is okay. Yeah. It just needs a trail so it will hopefully become a bridge to somewhere.
It will become a bridge to somewhere.
Yeah, I'm excited by that.
Yeah.
So the comprehensive plan this is something that is enshrined in state law, actually. It's a vision for the city. And so that got passed before my time, 2015, before I joined council. But that was phase one. So that's like a large vision for the city. But now we're going through this process where neighborhood by neighborhood, we're defining like what the zoning will be and what the specific plan will be. Mm-hmm. Waterfront is largely done. South side is in process. What is this phase two process of comprehensive planning?
Yeah. So it's not just, it's part of it's geographical and part of it's thematic. So we also did a parks master plan, the parks are so complicated. We have so many parks and so much acreage, and there will need to be a phase two of the parks master plan. But so it can be thematic parks plan. We also are talking about a transportation plan, but also geographical, like a neighborhood plan. So, we're doing South Side, other neighborhoods want plans because they feel like they have particular issues that are pressing, like South Hill. And so as, we feel like we can do probably one a year. And so we actually have a new planner joining our team soon who is a neighborhood planner. So he'll be able to help. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, it's great. We're really excited about that. So we'll take down the neighborhood plans as in the order that council sees fit based on what they're hearing from constituents. And we'll look at each. And some neighborhoods aren't going to change much doing the neighborhood plans is also an opportunity to bring the zoning up to 2018 from 1950. So that'll be a good, just to bring. Yeah, yes. So we do the neighborhood plans, and then we do the zoning that goes along with them.
I mean, there's cases where it seems like developments on the ground have kind of forced us to take action. That happened on South Hill with like the student rentals that were happening up there.
That's right.
And I've always found that that's always a tension with like long-term planning.
You want it to be reacting
I mean, I remember with, that's kind of was always an issue with the comprehensive plan too, because it took a long time to do the comprehensive plan.
It did.
It involves like so much stakeholder input and everything. And while you're preparing the plan,
things change.
Right. And there's things happening. And it's like, how do you respond to those things knowing that this plan is on its way? And like, I've noticed that like, with the backyard infill development issues arising now and issues with, there's been some issues with concern at like Washington Park with the amount of like social services that are going in along like West State Street. So there's like those kinds of issues, you're like, well, there's a plan. It's on its way. Like we're working on it, but it's, it takes time to develop this stuff and develop the zoning.
That's right. And, I think that again, there's like this tension between reacting to the situation and planning long-term. And we don't really have the luxury of just sitting back and doing all our long-term planning. Part of it is reacting to the situation.
Right.
I think in the waterfront, we saw a little bit of both. Like we knew that the waterfront was the next frontier. And so, yes, in some part it was reactionary. At the same time,
nobody was complaining.
Right. There was a few imminent issues.
Yeah.
And so that part of it was very forward thinking. And so I'm very proud of staff and the citizenry for participating and coming up with something that I think is going to yield phenomenal results. We're already seeing the fruits of it.
I absolutely agree. I think that area is going to totally transform. And because it was planned, it's going to be in a way that we want. Yeah.
I mean, that's a really exciting prospect with
it's very exciting.
I mean, remember first episode of the Ithacast, Seth famously said, we have the worst waterfront in upstate New York.
We do, though. We do. I mean, it really is.
Travel to any city in the area, in the region, and we're very deficient. And so I'm excited just because why should I have to go to Canandaigua and Watkins Glen to enjoy the waterfront?
We're still transitioning from an industrial waterfront to a different kind of waterfront.
I mean, I was line biking the waterfront trail recently.
Is that a verb?
It is a verb. And even biking on the which I think the waterfront trail is amazing. And that's part of the transition.
Right.
Creating something like the waterfront trail. But as you're riding along the waterfront trail, you're passing by this like chain link fence, and there's like this crushed rock on the other side with the DOT.
The DOT site, yeah.
And there's like all these like really industrial uses. And then when you get over by, like Enterprise in that area, there's all these like surface parking lots everywhere.
Right.
And there's just, you
oil
look
storage.
At it and you're like, storage, right. Like the propane tanks. And I mean, it's just amazing to me that we as a community haven't quite figured that out.
We haven't figured it out.
What we want our waterfront to look like.
Well, we're doing that.
We're doing it. That's
and
the
I
process.
Think, and the exciting thing to me is that a lot of times, so I've been here 13 years and I've been involved with initiatives to try to get something happening on the waterfront. And nothing, we did the Inland Island plan. We did all this stuff. Nothing really happened.
It just didn't click.
It didn't click. Yeah. And now we have the opportunity to have had the planning and the zoning and the market forces that are making it desirable to develop there. It's all coming together. And that's a great thing that we have it all at the same time.
And some big changes like the DOT facility relocated. That's a huge deal.
Huge deal. We have lots of projects, lots of interest in the waterfront. That's really going to be an area that we really are going to see some very positive change in housing options. And also, I think, options for, recreation and entertainment that are going to be really, people are going to love them, I think. Yeah. And, one of the big things about the waterfront that we're looking at too is the waterfront, and I think this is one of the reasons why development hasn't really happened there is it's really disconnected from the rest of the city by Route 13. And so we're really, was in the comprehensive plan. It's in the waterfront plan. We're really getting to a point where we need to seriously think of how to tame Route 13, make it into a boulevard, connect it to the rest of the grid of the city. And
I see State Street, that corridor being the connection between downtown and the waterfront.
Yes, yeah.
And so calming 13 is certainly part of that, but also redeveloping, State Street.
Yes.
Seth mentioned that there's some tension with nearby residents about the services. I think they're very important to our community to keep those services in place and to continue adding them. And I don't think that they're necessarily incompatible with adding more retail and restaurants and housing. So I would love just a mix of all kinds of demographics along that corridor that connects to the waterfront.
The more you have, the less of one thing you have. If you have a mix of everything, then things get absorbed and they're less. If you just have one, right now there is a portion of East State Street that has a lot of West State Street that has a lot of services. But if you add more to that, then that becomes less of the defining character, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does feel like that kind of is the next frontier for the city.
I think I absolutely agree with that. Yeah.
Like the West End and the waterfront.
I agree with that.
And a lot of thought has been put into it.
That's right.
And really careful thought has been put into it, which is good, I think, because that'll shape what happens there.
Yeah, that will shape what happens there. And, again, our challenge there is, as in many places in the city, the conditions, the subsurface conditions, it's very difficult to construct, very expensive to construct. You have to build a particular kind of foundation because the soils are very, very squishy. So being able to incorporate affordable housing into, making that area affordable will be a big challenge that we're going to work really hard to do.
I'm already seeing really creative uses like INHS partnering with Salvation Army to redevelop that site.
That's a great project.
Yes, that is a great
really
project.
Great for that block.
Drinking liquid state beer right now as we speak.
That's right.
Yeah.
We've all enjoyed the Westie, Saigon Kitchen, and the new ramen place. I think a lot of great stuff is happening on that.
And I want to say that, the beginning of that was, not that this isn't necessarily caused it, but the beginning of that was redoing the streetscape on State Street and making it pleasant.
Yeah,
and then all the investment came behind that. So
Right.
that's also for something for people to understand a little bit, that sometimes you have to put the investment in up front.
There was an infrastructure improvement. That's
true.
Yeah, it's like the commons, like make it better and then.
And if people don't notice, the lighting along State Street from the Commons all the way to 13 is consistent. There's the stamped concrete that looks like brick. The street itself is brick. So yeah, I agree.
Yeah,
I think that those
That's
visual amenities really
help. Yeah, they really help. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's turned into such a cool neighborhood down there.
It is.
It has been for a year. Like when Felicia's was there, and Gimme Coffee, and now Franco's is a great pizza place.
Yeah.
As someone from New Jersey, I have to say they're a pizza place that holds up the quality standards of the Pizza Belt.
I still haven't been there. I should go.
It's amazing.
Yeah, I need to go.
It's so good.
It's so good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So shout out to our West End businesses.
I know it sounds like we're being paid, but no, I actually just happen to love all those businesses.
No, they're great.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So we need to deal with affordability, and we also need to deal in the West End and the waterfront with transit. Even though the TCAP bus stop is there, we need to increase, as the density increases, they will also increase the amount of the routes through that area. That's right. So.
Yeah. Well, any other final thoughts on planning and development in the city of Ithaca?
Highlights, frustrations, anything?
Well, I just really think I've lived in a lot of places, and I really am amazed at how great Ithaca is and how many people are interested in being here and living here. And we're so lucky to have, I know it feels like change and it's uncomfortable for some people, but we're so lucky to be dealing with the changes that we're dealing with.
I've spoken with elected officials from other cities in upstate New York, and they envy us enormously.
Yes.
The problems we have, and let's be real, they are serious problems. Traffic is a problem.
It's a real problem.
So I would never downplay those issues. However, we are very lucky. And I say lucky, but we didn't even get to talk about how economic development is part of the planning department's
That's right.
purview.
I meant to mention that. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Actually, why don't you say a little bit about that right now?
So, and part of our planning department is an economic development aspect, and we have an economic development, a deputy director of economic development who is fairly new to the position. He came from Tompkins County as the director of tourism or a tourism planner. And so he does, and the other staff do too, working on the economic development of the city. So Tom Knipe is deputy director of economic development. He does business recruitment and retention. So he, helps businesses that want to stay, and like looks at businesses that might want to relocate into the area. It's looking at promoting the city, doing to new businesses, works with the Chamber of Commerce to help promote the city and make it attractive for people to both, because we want businesses to locate here, but we also want the employees of those businesses to want to live here. So you have to market the city to a certain extent and make sure it has the amenities that people are looking for. So, it's working with people to find suitable space. And
well, I think the changes downtown are remarkable.
Yeah.
I was emailing someone recently who was, again, expressing concern about the pace of growth in our city. And I told a story about my brother who visited recently and hadn't been back in 6 years, because we grew up here. We grew up in Trumansburg, so we know Ithaca. And he was like blown away because the last time that he saw the Commons, there were the pavilions on it. There was
it was before the
it was
renovation.
Before everything. Yeah. All of it was before the Marriott. It was before and he was just like, "What happened?"
Yeah,
it was amazing. I took him to Press Bay Alley and like
Press Bay Alley is amazing, and they're doing the second part of that too.
Press Bay Court.
Yeah,
Press Bay Court, and just walking down the Commons, and he was like, "This train, this is crazy. This is like real city stuff that's happening."
That's right.
Here. It feels much more urban.
Yeah,
and I realize that there's people have different levels of comfort with that. I think there's a lot of people in the city who are, probably arrived here a long time ago when Ithaca has always been a kind of small town to them. And the city, I think, is becoming more urban.
It's becoming more urban. And we want to create opportunity and amenity for people who want to stay here, for instance, after college.
Right. Exactly.
And that means that we want to make it attractive for a variety of people.
And I've always been optimistic that the city can combine that small town charm and the urban energy. But I think that's the trick, because
that's right.
Some people are much more comfortable with urban energy than others. And
right.
I think, and some people are more comfortable with the small town experience. And the trick is like combining it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that, as much as downtown has changed, the neighborhood that I'm
still
looking at my window is largely the same. The North Side Triangle has not changed in decades. Yeah. I mean, yes, paint colors change. But for the most part, these houses have been here for a century, including my own. And so I think we are balancing it pretty well, like increasing the urbanness of the core and other corridors through the city while maintaining South Side, North Side, Fall Creek pretty well.
Yep.
And that's the thing I've always valued about this place is that you can go from a fairly urban experience on the Commons or on Aurora Street, walk and be in a quiet residential neighborhood, and then bike out the Black Diamond Trail. All of a sudden, you're in like a rural area.
It's amazing. Like
it's unusual actually to have.
I think it's very unusual to have these kinds of neighborhoods, really pleasant, unchanged neighborhoods in a city that has a dense core. Very close by. Yeah.
The fact that we can have access to farmland and an Ethiopian restaurant, which heretofore I've only seen in Philly and DC. I mean, we are.
There's a lot of variety.
I keep saying the word lucky, but
we are.
I mean, we're lucky, but we're also, let's not downplay the fact that a lot of this took a lot work and planning. And forethought.
Yep. Yes. Yeah.
Well, thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks you for having me. Yeah.
Appreciate it.
All right.
See you at the next planning board meeting.
Okay, yes.